If that ball striking looks all too familiar to you, then I'm going to talk to you today about how you can stop flipping your wrists at impact and dramatically improve the quality of your ball striking. Flipping the wrists at impact is a common problem demonstrated by high handicap golfers all over the world, leading to poor contact, inconsistent ball striking, and poor distance. If you want to understand what flipping is, you need to know that it's when the shaft of the golf club overtakes the lead arm in the downswing prematurely. If this happens before impact, you're going to be someone who's guilty of flipping the club at the ball. I've already stated it costs lots of directional and distance problems. It also causes lots of contact issues, such as hitting the ground before the ball, topping the ball, and even missing the ball. Excessively flipping your wrists at impact like this is a pattern demonstrated by high handicap golfers all over the world. You'll know, if you've watched enough golf, that the best players demonstrate an impact position where the shaft is still leaning forwards. The shaft is trailing the lead arm. The poorest golfers who flip would see this shaft overtake the lead arm in the downswing prior to impact prematurely, putting the golf club at risk of hitting the ground before the ball, and then they start to stand up and top the ball. You'll also notice that this delivery of club, where the shaft is leaning backwards, will increase the amount of loft that you're delivering to the ball. So even if you do hit the ball with a reasonable contact, you're going to find your distance is lacking because your golf club is too open and has too much loft on it. Without any doubt, the number one reasons golfers flip the club at impact is in an attempt to square the club face, to make the club face come back to the ball in a position that's functional enough for them to hit a relatively straight shot. And that flip is born out of the fact that somewhere during the swing, the club face has become too open. And if they didn't stop and stall and flip, this club face, this open club face that they're delivering to the ball, would be presented in such a way that the shot would fly so far offline, the golfer wouldn't allow that to happen. So it's a reaction to a problem that's happening somewhere else in the swing. It's really important you understand that the club face getting out of position early in the swing has a knock-on effect to everything that happens after that. So to summarize, the number one problem is the wrist angles and how you're spinning and twisting this club throughout the swing. Something to note that is extremely important at this point: you are already twisting this club throughout the swing. You may not feel it because the swing that you make feels extremely natural and comfortable. It is your swing. But throughout the swing, you're imposing forces around and about this shaft that are changing the direction of this club face throughout the entire time of the swing. And if you struggle with contact and flipping in particular, it's almost a certainty that you've got these wrist angles wrong. Let's take a look at how they should be in terms of good wrist angles. We're going to start out here looking at lead wrist extension. Extension and flexion. Extension and flexion. Should be familiar with those terms of extending the wrist, which typically opens the club face, and flexing the wrist, which would do more of a closing part. Now, let's take a look at my measurements in terms of setup. I'm setting up with 19 degrees of extension. There's a small amount of extension in the back of the wrist here. And as I swing to the top and make my normal backswing, that extension number disappears completely, and the wrist is now 2 to 3 degrees flexed. Essentially, it's flat. That's a good place to be, and that's typical of a better player's pattern. They would go from a small amount of extension at setup, and they would lose that extension during the backswing, meaning there's a subtle but definite twist of the golf club down towards the ground. As you look at me from this down the line view, the toe of the club is going to be twisted down slightly towards the ground. That gets me to the top in this very relatively flat condition. We have 0 degrees there at the top. And then as I swing down, you'll see how I'm trying to increase that flex all the way to the point of impact. If I manage to do that, if I put that lead wrist in some degree of flexion there, that's 8 degrees of flexion versus 19 degrees of extension when I started, that 20 to 30 degrees of change will allow me to deliver this club with no flip. It will allow me to lean the shaft forward as I want to. And the reason I want to do this is shaft lean promotes multiple benefits in terms of ball striking. It promotes a downward hit on the ball. The club traveling down when it hits the golf ball is a good thing. It helps you to hit high enough up on the club face to benefit from the full power of the sweet spot. Secondly, delivering some shaft lean also reduces the amount of dynamic loft that you're delivering to the ball, meaning the club face is less lofted, stronger. It's almost like I'm turning this 8 iron into a 7 iron. So I'm going to promote and produce much more compression, faster ball speeds, and greater distance. Simply put, if I get the wrists into the right condition in the backswing and the downswing, there's no need to stop and flip. There's no need for a last minute decision to recover this club face and try to square it up. So the only reason you're flipping is because your wrist angles are wrong in the first place. Poor wrist angles would typically look like too much extension of this lead wrist. A wrist that cups and bends in this condition like so. Using the avatar and the picture on the screen there's up to 40 degrees of extension there. That's a huge problem, which puts this club face completely out of position. And then what you do subconsciously is spend that split second in the downswing trying to recover by swinging over the top, by flipping, by trying to do everything in your power to get this club face to be somewhat functional from a directional point of view. However, doing that, as we've already touched on, creates all these other problems in terms of contact, hitting behind the ball, topping the ball, thinning the ball, and getting all sorts of mishits, which means you're the most inconsistent golfer, as opposed to being someone who can go out there and deliver this club in a consistent fashion time after time. A really nice exercise to help you reduce the flipping and get the correct sense of the wrist angles at impact and throughout the stroke would be to set up with a alignment stick here just off the side of the actual shaft. One great thing, and one thing I would encourage you to do at setup is to ensure that you have some shaft lean at setup. This is promoting good alignments at impact to start with. You'll notice how the orange stick here is angled just slightly off of the shaft of the golf club, and that's a good thing. That left arm and the orange stick are really just a straight line, and I have this shaft very slightly angled back from my left arm. So the orange stick is representing my lead arm, and it's an extension of my lead arm. And what we want to have in the backswing and the downswing here is maintaining that sensation that the shaft is always trailing the lead arm. And in order to do that, my wrists need to move in a very efficient way, a very positive way, a way that I would encourage that lead wrist to move into that flex condition. You see there how there's 6, 7, 8 degrees of flex into impact, wrist is flexed, and into the follow through, I'm able to maintain that feeling of flexion. Having that visual and understanding that the shaft should feel like it's always trailing this lead arm is a really good one to help you improve your ball striking. Then the way that we would practice that would be to set up, making sure, again, we have the shaft lean. One of the other components to making sure you do this well is that your grip is sound. And if you find it very difficult to achieve some of these wrist conditions that I'm describing, chances are your grip needs some attention. When I look down at my grip here, I can see 2 to 3 knuckles on my lead hand. That's important. Minimum of 2. For those of you struggling with shaft lean, I'd encourage you to even look at making sure that a minimum of 3 knuckles visible. That turns the hand on the grip like so, helps me to get this shaft leaning more forwards. And then as I swing back from this extended condition, I'm going to move the wrist into a small amount of flexion, turn that club face down to the ground, and as I hit the ball, I'm going to hit with the feeling that my hands are in front of the club head, whilst at the same time twisting this wrist sufficiently to close the club face sufficiently. There's 18, 17, 18, 16 degrees of flexion there. If I just try to move the handle more forward, just push it more forwards, you'll see how that club face visually is completely inappropriate. That is not going to hit a functional shot. And you'll see on the screen there how the wrist is still in extension. So I've got the shaft lean. What you need to add is the twist or the flexion. We're now down to 16, 17 degrees again of flexion. So come down, hands in front, but also twisted, wrist turned and twisted so that the club face looks square. The drill to hit shots with this would be to hit with the hands forward and stop the club head immediately after impact, like a punch drill, like a very long chip shot. That should produce shots like that, a low ball flight, which had a tiny, tiny amount of draw. That was a 100-yard sort of chip shot there. We were able to take the wrist from 18 degrees of extension at setup to 1 degree at the top, so effectively made the club and the wrist in this very neutral condition at the top. And then as I hit the ball there, I had 6 degrees of flexion. So I was able to completely change the twisting element of the wrist from extension to flexion. Extension is open, flexion is closed, and then I'm able, with this closed club face, to push the hands forward and deliver that desirable shaft lean that I'm looking for. Ultimately, it's important to remember that the ball is the judge. If the balls are still slicing off to the right, you're going to say that the club face is still too open, despite you trying to introduce some of these new moves. And this is where having something that measures what's going on at the wrist level is extremely valuable to see what's really going on. We know that feel and real can often be very different. But if your balls are curving too much to the right, the typical pattern would be the club face is too open. Add more twisting. Rotate the wrists and the grip during the backswing, during the downswing, so that you're able to deliver a club face that's stronger and more able to have that shaft lean that you're looking for. Equally, if you start to overdo this correction and twist the face too much, you will start to see the balls going to the left. The skill of controlling the wrists is really the skill of controlling the club face. And it's only the best golfers who ever really learn the skill of club face control. Once you get it, it will be like very straightforward, right? Riding a bike. Once you've got that sense of where this club face should be in space, it's quite easy to reproduce. The problem you're experiencing right now is because it's so comfortable for you to swing how you've always swung, you're just going about repeating the same mistakes. So you're going to need to get a little bit uncomfortable for a short while you explore these different ranges of motion and you experiment with this wrist twisting. Remember, you are twisting the wrists already, you're just not doing it how you need to. Shaft lean, make sure the hands are forward, twist the club face down to the ground, get that lead wrist flexion that we're looking for, and then hit the ball with maximum flexion and maximum shaft lean. Little draw, slight curve to the left. More flexion at impact than I had at setup. These are the numbers that you would want to strive for when you're working with hack motion. If you have your own experiences of working on this problem, get down in the comments and explain to us how you've done it and your experience of working on improving your wrist angles and reducing the flip. And if you want to watch more videos on wrist angles and drills for how to improve your wrist conditions, make sure you click the link below.